Okay. First, let's add some compression. We'll do a hiss reduction.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Welcome to this episode of the Air Force Doctrine Podcast, where we're going to interview our three essay contest winners from the spring 2024 IDI essay contest. So, without further ado, we'll just announce and introduce the winners. So, third place here is Major Matthew White. Second place, Tech Sergeant Matthew Calhoun, and first place is First Lieutenant Ian Palmer. And as a reminder for our listening audience, the prompt for the spring 2024 essay contest was to write an essay on how artificial intelligence will necessitate changes to U.S. Air Force doctrine. So that's what their papers were about. They did a great job writing their essays. They were a pleasure to read, and the essays are available to read on AUIX's website as well as doctrine.af.mil. So we'll just get right into it. Wanted to give our paper writers a chance to introduce themselves and introduce their papers. So we'll go to Major Matthew White. Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the event, and I really enjoyed thinking through this problem set. It's been something that's been on the radar for
No
me for
need to
many
do
years,
that.
but just on my background, I started out with a getting an electrical engineering degree through the Citadel, and joined the Air Force as a 62E developmental engineer. I did a tour up at the Air Force Research Lab as a lieutenant. Followed on down at Eglin in the electronic warfare group, doing all sorts of fun and exciting adventures there. And then had a few assignments now with the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, first in the Weather Systems Programs Office, and now I'm back down in the Armament Center. So got to see a little bit of the entire product life cycle from a few different perspectives. And it seems to me that you know pieces and parts of the AI puzzle have started to emerge along the way, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and tried to add that into the paper that I thought up. I really My paper came about as a kind of a thought experiment from one of my senior leaders here at
I
Eglin,
actually like that one.
who coached or who thought through a problem of new technologies in basically bucketing them in four different ways. Where if you had a status quo environment where neither you or
I
your
think we have a
opponent
problem
was
with.
using an emerging technology, in this case AI, then another if you had the
Uh,
advantage and they did not. The third event would be if your opponent got there first, and then the fourth would be if both you and your opponent had some sort of new technology. And you can look at this historically through the advancements in nuclear weapons, low observables, things like that, that really change the dynamics of warfare. And kind of from there, I kind of thought through the changes that you'd have to make to try to be successful in any one of those. And given the current geopolitical events, I tried to limit myself to thinking through how would the introduction of a battlefield AI, specifically one that could collapse its own OODA loop and do its own you know, systematic targeting, target prioritization, and then um, strike execution and battlefield assessment,
kind of like that.
and to the pursuit of whatever
All right.
your battlefield commander was looking to accomplish.
Now, I think that sound probably about where I want it for now. So now let's work on getting rid of the verbal pauses.
And we
Might help if I put the cursor where I'm wanting to start here.
Recording.
Oh, come on. I cut this off. Why is it not cut off here, but it's cut off here? I don't understand Adobe sometimes. I don't get why it does that.
All right. Are you recording, teams? All right, Todd, here we go.
Come on.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Here. Welcome to this episode of the Air Force Doctrine Podcast, where we're going to interview our three SA contest winners from the spring 2024 IDI SA contest. So without further ado, IDI SA contest. Without further ado,
Guess I'll leave the so in there.
IDI SA contest. So without further contest. So without further contest. So without further ado, we'll just announce the and introduce the
Should be the right there.
Announce the and introduce the winner. So third. Without further ado, we'll just announce the and introduce the winner. So
I think he says.
we'll just announce the and introduce the winner. So further ado, we'll just announce the and introduce the winner. We'll just announce.
I think I'll just say.
Further ado, we'll just announce the and we'll just announce the
I think we'll go with just introduce.
Further ado, we'll just introduce the winner. So third place here is Major Matthew White. Second place, Tech Sergeant Matthew Calhoun. And first place is First Lieutenant Ian Palmer. And as a reminder for our Lieutenant Ian Palmer. As a reminder for our listening audience, the prompt for the spring 2024 SA contest. 24 SA prompt for the spring 2024 essay contest was to write an essay on how artificial intelligence will necessitate changes to U.S. Air Force doctrine. So that's what their papers were about. They did a great job writing their essays. They were a pleasure to read, and they are the essays are a pleasure to read, and they're a pleasure to read. Pleasure to read, and they were a pleasure to read. Essays are available to
Need a little bit of a pause there.
They were a pleasure to read. The essays are available to read on They were a pleasure to read. The essays are available to read on AUIX's website as well as doctrine.af.mil. So we'll just we'll just get right into it. Wanted to give our paper writers a chance to introduce themselves and introduce their papers. So we'll go to Major Matthew White. Tell Major Matthew White. Tell yourself. Major Matthew White. Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning.
Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning.
Yourself.
Yes, good morning.
Yourself.
Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the. Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the hosting. Thanks again for hosting the. Thanks again for hosting the event. Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the event, and I really. Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the event, and really enjoyed.
Too awkward.
Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning. Thanks again for hosting the event, and.
Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning.
I'm just going to cut that out.
Tell us about yourself.
Thanks again for hosting the event, and really enjoyed thinking through this.
Wanted to give our paper writers a chance to introduce. Wanted to give our paper writers a chance. Wanted to give our paper writers a chance to introduce themselves. Give our wanted to give our paper writers a chance to introduce themselves and introduce their papers. So we'll go to Major Matthew White. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks again for hosting the event, and really enjoyed thinking through this problem.
Well, I don't need that.
About yourself.
Thanks again for hosting the event, and really enjoyed thinking through this problem set. It's.
I don't need two thinking.
Really enjoyed thinking. And really enjoyed thinking through this problem set. It's been thinking through this problem set. Thinking through this problem set. It's been some of it's been on the problem set. It's problem set.
I can't get rid of all that.
Problem set. It's been some of it's been. Thinking through this problem set. Some of it's been on the radar for me. Thinking through this problem set. Some of it's been on the set. Some of it's been. Thinking through this problem set. Some of it's been on the radar for me for many years. Thinking through this problem set. Some of it's been on the radar for me for many years, but think this problem set. Some of it's been on some of it's been some of it's been on the
See what that does.
thinking through this problem set. Some of it's been on the radar for me for many years, but on the radar for me for many years. You know, just on my background, I started out with a getting an electrical engineering degree. I started out with a getting I started out getting an electrical engineering degree through the Citadel. Electrical engineering degree through the
Your mommy to come get? He was standing there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pop Pop's working and has his headset on.
degree through the Citadel, and joined the electrical engineering degree through the Citadel. Getting an electrical engineering degree through the Citadel, and joined the Air Force. You know, just on my background, I started out getting an electrical engineering degree through the Citadel, joined the Air Force as a 62E developmental engineer. A 62E developmental engineer. I did a tour up at the Air Force Research Lab as a lieutenant. Followed on down at followed on lieutenant. Followed on down at Eglin. Followed on down followed on down at Eglin.
I can get rid of down.
Lieutenant. Followed on at Eglin.
Yeah.
Lieutenant. Followed on at Eglin in the electronic warfare group, doing all sorts of group doing all sorts of fun group doing all sorts of fun and exciting doing all sorts of fun and exciting adventures there. Doing all sorts of fun and exciting adventures there, and then had a few fun and exciting adventures there, and then had a few assignments now with the Air Force. And all sorts of fun and exciting all sorts of fun and exciting adventures there. And then had a few assignments now with the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, first in the Weather Systems Programs Office, and now I'm back down in the Armament Center. So got to see a little bit of center. So got to see a little bit of the entire got to see a little bit of the entire product life cycle from a few different center. So got to see a little bit of the entire product life cycle from a few different perspectives. And it seems to me life cycle from a few different perspectives. And it seems to me that and
I'll just get rid of that whole "it seems."
a few different perspectives. It seems to me that pieces and parts of the AI from a few different perspectives. It seems to me that
I don't know. Megan, take out that.
perspectives. It seems to me that pieces and parts of the AI puzzle have started from a few different perspectives. It seems to me that pieces and parts of the AI puzzle have started to emerge along the way. And so I thought emerge along the way. Thought that was kind of interesting.
I missed the I somewhere. Maybe I'll just leave the whole "so" part. Let's see.
Emerge along the way. So I thought that was kind of interesting to emerge along the way. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Along the way. So I thought that was kind of interesting and tried to add that into the paper that I had add that into the and tried to add that into the paper that I had and tried to add that into the paper that I thought into the paper that I thought up the paper that I had add that into the paper that I had thought up. I really that into the paper that I had thought up. I really, my paper came about as a tried to add that into the paper that I had thought up. I really, my paper add that into the paper that I had thought up. My paper came about as a kind of a thought experiment. My paper came about as kind of a thought experiment from one of my senior thought experiment kind of a thought experiment from one of my senior leaders here at Eglin, who kind of who coached or who thought through a problem of one of my senior leaders here at Eglin, who
See how that flows.
from one of my senior leaders here at Eglin, who thought through a problem of one of my senior leaders here at Eglin, one of my senior leaders here at Eglin, who thought through a problem of new technologies in basically bucketing them in 4 different ways. Where if you had a status quo environment, where if you had a status quo environment where neither you or your opponent was using an emerging technology, in this case AI, then another if you had the advantage and they did not. The third event would be if you're the third event would be if would be if they would be they did not. The third event would be if your opponent got there first, and then the fourth would be if both you and your opponent if both of your if both of your both you if both you and your opponent had some sort of new technology, and you can look at this historically and you can look at this
I don't know how to fix this.
if both you and your opponent had some sort of new technology, and you can look at this
I don't know how to fix that.
and you can look at this historically through the advancements in nuclear weapons, low observables, things like that really change the dynamics of warfare. And kind of from there I kind of thought through the dynamics of warfare. And kind of from there I kind of thought through
Somebody else to be able to get it, put it in there.
warfare. From there I kind of thought through the changes that you'd have to make to try to be through the changes that you'd have to make to try to be successful in any one of those. And given the current geopolitical of those, and given the current geopolitical events, I tried to limit myself to thinking through how would a
No, that mute button doesn't mute that anymore.
Where, guys ready to
That didn't do it either.
Leaving soon.
Okay. Back to it. Where was I? One thing go. Accidentally docked it. There it is. Not that I expect stream to watch this, but you never know. Back to where I was.
I tried to limit myself to thinking through how would the introduction of a limit myself to thinking through how would
Get that how to kind of go together.
thinking through how the introduction thinking through how the introduction of
There's the H on the first how.
myself to thinking through how the introduction of a battlefield AI, specifically one that could collapse its own OODA loop and do its own systematic target. Do its own systematic targeting, do its own systematic targeting, target prioritization, and then strike execution and battlefield assessment, and to the assessment, to the pursuit of whatever your battlefield commander was looking to accomplish. And we see some of the and we saw to accomplish. We see some of the early some of the early pursuit of whatever your battlefield commander was looking to accomplish. We see some of the early looking to accomplish. We see some of the we see some of the early possibilities of this. Some of the early your battlefield commander was looking to accomplish. We see early possibilities of this in the
Oh, that.
some of the we see some of the early possibilities of to the pursuit of whatever your battlefield commander was looking to accomplish. We see some of the early possibilities of this.
Leave all that.
We see some of the early possibilities of this in the war in Ukraine right now, with the introduction of things like micro drones and very small targeted strikes, where you have very limited strikes where you have very small targeted strikes where you have very limited investment. Small targeted strikes where you have very limited investment. Where you have limited investment of resources from a platform like have limited investment of resources from a platform like that. Limited investment of resources from
Do that.
investment of resources from a platform like that. Of resources from a platform like that, they get a very high they get a very high return. And I kind of just thought through what would be the next step if an AI was able to do that targeting and you didn't have to have a person on the back end of each one of those platforms. So that's kind of how I approached my essay. And how I approach my essay. And I think we got how I approach my essay. And I think we got essay. And I think we got approach my essay. And I think we got my essay, and I think we got a number of good ideas out of it. I think we got and I think we got a number of good ideas out of it. But over to you. Zero ideas out of it. But good ideas out of it. Over to you. Is that about what
Yeah.
you're looking for? Over to you. We got a number of good ideas out of it. Over to you. A number of good ideas out of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So, and your paper talks about
Out of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Of it.
So, and your paper talks
That.
so, and your paper so, and
All of that.
Of it.
your paper talks about it has the matrix that you're talking about with the that you're talking about with the four different that you're talking about with the four different conditions of having the artificial intelligence technology between an adversary and the United States. So that was a great way to break this down and think about the 4 different possible scenarios that we could potentially face. Scenarios that we could potentially face. And then you had some good discussions on training artificial intelligence, and then how artificial intelligence, especially the battlefield AI you're discussing, artificial intelligence, especially the artificial intelligence, especially the battlefield AI you're discussing, affects intelligence, especially the battlefield AI you're discussing, affects AFDP 3.0 for operations and AFDP 1.3.0 for operations and AFDP 1-1 for mission command and targeting. So being able to distribute some of those processes down to a lower level, and then operate a very fast OODA loop. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get into the other papers, but thank you. More about that later when we get into the other papers, but thank you. Yeah, excellent paper, excellent work. Staff Sergeant Matthew Calhoun. Staff Sergeant Matthew Calhoun. Matthew Calhoun, coming to us from Calhoun, coming to us from Colorado. Please tell us about yourself and tell us about your paper.
Well, good.
Tell us about your paper.
Good morning. I am Tech Sergeant.
About your paper.
Good morning. I am Tech Sergeant Matthew Calhoun, and I'm pretty humbled to be here. And I'm Sergeant Matthew Calhoun, and I'm pretty humbled.
Gotta get rid of these uhs.
Pretty humbled. I'm pretty humbled to be here. Pretty humbled to be here. Thank you for putting this together and for the whole Curtis LeMay Center for whole Curtis LeMay and the whole Curtis LeMay Center for kind of holding this essay contest. Essay contest. It was It was a lot more research, a lot more knowledge, you know, so many things going on. A lot more knowledge. Research, a lot more knowledge, so many things going on that I didn't even begin. So many things going on that I didn't even begin to consider beforehand. So
Wonder if I can get rid of this noise with this sound. Rid of this. Call that a noise print. See if that does anything here.
Beforehand, so it was a steep learning curve.
Seemed to help.
So many things going on that I didn't even begin to consider beforehand. So it was
All right. Seemed to get rid of some of that metallic ringing that was going on with him. I wonder if I need to get rid of this too. Let's see what that does. Just get rid of it along here.
begin to consider beforehand.
Holy cow. No, that's his actual speech apparently.
Begin to consider beforehand. Begin to consider beforehand. So it was.
Oh, wait a minute. I know what the problem was.
Begin to consider beforehand. So it was a steep knowledge. So many things going on that I didn't even begin to consider beforehand. So it was.
I can't tell it really did a difference, so I'm just not going to worry about it.
Even begin to consider beforehand. So it was a steep learning curve, to be sure. Steep learning curve, to be sure. So my AFSC is 1 and 2 Charlie, which officially 1 and 2 Charlie, which officially falls under the umbrella of signals intelligence and signals intelligence. Currently, I'm at Buckley Space Force Intelligence. Currently, intelligence. Currently, I'm at Buckley. Currently, I'm at Buckley Space Force Base, Colorado. Where my duty title is NCOIC of Signals Analysis. So my essay.
I capture all the stuff I was supposed to cut out. I need to check. Okay, I did. Okay.
Signals analysis. My essay starts out with a short introduction, noting Space Force Base, Colorado, where my duty title is NCOIC of Signals Analysis. My essay starts out with a short introduction, noting how AI is already a part of our society, and increasingly part of the Air Force as well, and that there are many advantages, disadvantages, factors, and variables to consider. And from there, I quickly moved into the core competence. And from there, I quickly moved into the core competencies, focusing on how AI.
Can't tell if he's saying of or
Focusing on how AI will.
I think I'll just get rid of it. So he's saying of or
competencies, focusing on how AI will enhance air superiority, ISR. Air superiority, ISR, which stands for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, rapid intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, rapid global mobility, and global strike. And in this section, I focus much more on the pros and the cons, having opted to focus on the potential advantages of AI for these competencies and how they'll be made better for the future. Then in the following section, I get into some specific doctrines. I chose 4: counter air, counter land, counter land, sea burn, your chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, and legal support. I chose these 4 because it seemed like out of all the publications I researched, these 4 would likely be especially relevant in the short term as AI becomes more important. And it is in this section where I do start pointing out some limitations and concerns regarding AI and just complexities that it'll add to the operational picture. And I tried my best to predict how these factors would require would require some slight amendments or maybe even significant amendments to Air Force doctrine. Then in the last section, I talk about several operational challenges for commanders to consider, and I round it all out by emphasizing that AI is just a tool and it could never replace our airmen, and that we cannot afford to let AI allow us to become lazy or not lazy or lazy or not, just anything like that. We don't want to be lazy. That we cannot afford to let AI allow us to become lazy or not
Just get rid of it didn't flow.
to let AI allow us to become lazy.
Too much.
Or we become lazy. AI allow us to become lazy. Just anything like that. We don't want to be lazy because of AI, just like with any new development. Finally, my conclusion is also brief, but highlights AI as being one of the biggest developments for the military since the airplane came about, and generally noting that with this expanded capability, we'll also have greater responsibility moving forward. So in a nutshell, that's my essay, and thank you. That's my essay. Thank you again for having me here. That's my essay. Thank you again for having me here. Thank you again for having me here.
Yeah, man.
Thank you again for having me here.
Yeah, man. Dude, I was really impressed by the. Yeah, man. Dude, I was really impressed. Yeah, man. I was really impressed. Yeah, man. I was really impressed by the. I was really impressed by the part of your paper where you talk about operational challenges caused by AI, and the statement you make about not letting AI let us be lazy. I thought that was us be lazy. I thought that was very insightful, and the line where you. I thought that was very insightful, and the line where you said AI will ironically make it necessary for American and allied forces to understand themselves better. Understanding ourselves and understanding the AI and how it works will be critical to using the AI so that we understand the decisions that it makes and understand how those decisions impact what we do. So AI decisions impact what we do. So AI, just a tool, like you stated, but like any other tool, just like a calculator, you still got to understand how you are applying it in a given situation. So great. So great thoughts there on the application of artificial intelligence to future combat operations.
Thanks, Pabst. Thanks, Pabst. I'm first. Thanks, Pabst.
Combat operations.
I'm First Lieutenant Ian Palmer. I'm an EC-130H Compass Call. I'm an EC-130H Compass Call Electronic Warfare Officer out of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona. I did my undergraduate degree at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I studied computer Institute of Technology. Institute of Technology, where I studied computer Institute of Technology, where I studied
Thing was part of the
Institute of Technology, where I studied computer science. And my first assignment was at my first assignment was at MIT as well with the Department of the Air Force MIT AI Accelerator, where I was able to stay at MIT and work on my master's degree in computer science, all focused on artificial intelligence and specifically looking at how AI could address some challenge areas for the Air Force. So my research was in developing a data set called Spoken Object Net. Which is intended to reduce some of the biases inherent in some other artificial intelligence datasets. Reduce some of the biases inherent in some other artificial intelligence datasets. And so for this datasets. So for this paper, I was able to take some of the experience I had working with artificial intelligence, coupled with some of the coupled with
He's saying, there, isn't he?
working with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Working with artificial intelligence, coupled with some of the experiences I had while deployed to the 609th Air Operations Center, and couple those together to the Operations Center, and couple those together to get at the question of how artificial intelligence could change U.S. Air Force doctrine. And the focus of my paper was really these three
I think he's saying
these three human machine teaming concepts. Those being human in the loop, human on the loop, and human out of the loop teaming. And these aren't really new concepts. These are these aren't really new concepts. These are sort of industry standard terminologies. For how humans and machines interact. And then I also how humans and machines interact. And then I also framed my essay in sort of a historical grounding with the first and second offsets. With the first and second offsets. So a lot of this specifically is based on first and second offsets. So a lot of second offsets. This specifically is based on the first and second offsets. First and second offsets. This
Get rid of some of this.
first and second offsets. This specifically is based on Deputy Secretary offsets. This specifically is based on
Oops. That's silence.
This specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. This specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. This specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work's third offset.
Leave that.
Based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work's third offset.
Bob Worth. Work. Deputy Secretary.
Specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob.
Rid of the
Deputy Secretary. Specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. Sets. This specifically is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob. Deputy Secretary is based on Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work's third offset. Offset, which is offset, which is focused on offset, which is focused on the integration of information age technologies, if you will, into how the Air Force operates. And so seeing the current challenge we face as kind of a continuation how the Air Force operates. And so seeing the current challenge we face as kind of a continuation of the first and second offsets, which were maybe a little.
I don't know if this was rid of that. I'm sure it just like he lost his train of thought,
if you will, into how the Air Force operates. The current challenge we face is kind of a continuation of the first and second off. Continuation of the first and second offsets, which were maybe a little bit focused on nuclear. little bit focused on nuclear weapons and that strategic offsets, which were maybe a little bit focused on nuclear weapons and that strategic nuclear weapons nuclear weapons and that weapons nuclear weapons nuclear weapons and that strategic
Yeah. I'll just,
nuclear weapons and that strategic nuclear weapons and that strategic competition. So my paper proposes that operation strategic competition. So my paper proposes that operational commanders should be able to determine the human machine teaming mode based on a number of different factors but making a number of different factors being able to make a number of different factors being able to make that determination in real time in order to delegate certain authorities operational authorities, whether that's an engagement authority, an identification authority, et cetera, to use a few specific examples. So delegate identification authority, et cetera, to use a few specific examples. So delegate those authorities to machines and have a mechanism delegate those authorities to machines and have a mechanism and have a to machines and have a mechanism in doctrine by which they can specify the level of human oversight in that process. In that process. There are a few challenges that I note in my paper. In that process. There are a few challenges that I note in my paper. The first of which is that artificial intelligences tend to behave as black boxes, and they don't really have much experience. And they don't really have much explainability into how or why they make decisions, which is how or why they make decisions, which is a little bit discomforting from a military decision-making standpoint. And then there's also the possibility that and military decision-making standpoint. Then there's also the possibility that artificial intelligences may make a mistake and may make a decision that a human wouldn't. And there are challenges a decision that a human wouldn't. And so there are challenges, certainly, when it comes to delegating military decision making to an AI. That was the summary of my paper. I'll pass it back to you, Pabst.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
That was the summary of my paper. I'll pass it back to you, Pabst.
Thanks, Lieutenant Palmer. Your paper does a Palmer.
Pabst.
Thanks, Lieutenant Palmer. Your paper does a good job of explaining those teaming modes that you were discussing. And in those terms, like you said, human in the loop, or human input is required for a process, then human on the loop, where the process occurs, but a human is present to validate or invalidate, can stop the process. And then you got full autonomy, human out of the loop. The machine is making its own decision, it's executing on the decision. So executing on the decision. The way that your paper characterizes those is the way that your paper characterizes those is it talks about those as paper characterizes those as it talks about those as good, and it talks about how it talks about how even it talks about those as good, and it talks about how is good, and it talks good, and it talks about how talks good, and talks good, and it good, and it talks about how it talks about those as good, and it talks about how it talks about those as good, and it talks about how even as we move through those processes, there's different good, and it talks about how even as we move through those processes, there's different amounts of risk involved in using those teaming modes. So as you move through the different modes, human in the loop, then on the loop, and then out of the loop, the risk level potentially goes up. And that's something that our commanders in an operational environment would be interested in knowing and interested in understanding what the risk is. So do you have any thoughts on how to characterize the risk of using an AI to a commander. I know there's a to a commander. To a commander. I know there's a lot of to a commander. There's a to a commander. I know there's a lot of potential scenarios, and everyone's familiar with like the Terminator movies, the Skynet, and there's the using AI to make decisions by itself obviously incurs some level of risk. How do we convey that some level of risk? How do we convey that to a commander? Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great question, and it's challenging. It's challenging in particular because it can depend on the exact sort of system that is available at the time, and as artificial intelligence artificial intelligence today isn't the artificial intelligence of 2 years ago, and so as these systems evolve and become more mature, 2 years ago, and so as these systems evolve and become more mature, that could very easily change over time. But there are a few metrics, I think. That operational commanders could use to inform their understanding of the risk involved. And so there are, for instance, involved. And so there are, for instance, risk involved. For instance, the risk involved. For instance, the performance involved. For instance, the performance of an AI in a testing or training environment. Generally when evaluating an AI system, you'll look at the error rate, the loss of that system during training and testing, and so that could inform, how system during training and testing, and so that could inform how good is this system at the task it is designed to solve. And then beyond that, in practice, I think there's a lot of similarities between this problem and, funnily enough, this problem, and funnily enough, something like a self-driving vehicle where it's a same well, really human driver, and funnily enough, something like a self-driving vehicle where it's a same well, it's a same well, really human drivers want to understand the risk there. Something like a self-driving vehicle where it's a same driving vehicle where, well, really human drivers want something like a self-driving vehicle. Well, really human drivers want to understand the risk they're accepting when they're sitting in a self-driving vehicle. So I can tell you that this vehicle is 99.99% 9.99%, successful. 0.99% successful in driving, but what really does that mean? But what really does that mean? Successful in driving, and what really does that mean? Successful in driving, and what really does that mean? What is the mean? What is the incident rate expected per 1,000 hours of driving versus a human driver? Maybe that's a good metric that I'd want to know if I'm in a self-driving vehicle. In a self-driving vehicle. But then there's always the challenge too, and we've seen this in practice with self-driving vehicles where humans make a lot of mistakes while driving. That's not a secret. It's not a secret. So do self-driving vehicles. It's not a secret. And self-driving vehicles also make mistakes. Even if they're making fewer mistakes on average, they get a lot of attention when they do make a mistake. So when somebody gets hurt in a self-driving car, there's a lot of scrutiny. Where there maybe isn't as much scrutiny when a human's scrutiny when a human's behind the wheel. So it's that I think the Air Force when a human's behind the wheel. So it's that I think behind the wheel. I think the Air Force can take a lot of lessons from the commercial sector here. Specifically with self-driving vehicles, when they're saying, okay, how are consumers self-driving vehicles? When they're saying, okay, how are self-driving vehicles? When they're saying, okay, how are consumers understanding the risk? the risk versus how the risk versus how is the Joint Forces Commander understanding the risk of AI? It's a sort of funny place to draw inspiration from, but I think the commercial sector is working on that exact same sort of risk assessment.
What factors would you use to
risk assessment? Risk assessment.
What factors would you use to determine which human teaming mode can be employed? And should commanders delegate the selection of that teaming mode to weapon system operators? That teaming mode to weapon system operators? Weapon system operators?
I think a few of the biggest factors that an operational commander could use to determine the teaming mode. Some are things like political considerations, again, going back to the possibility of mistakes. Or something like the Air Force, you might be concerned with if you're be concerned with, maybe as an example of mistakes or something like the Air Force, you might be concerned with, maybe as an example, delegating or something like the Air Force, you might be concerned or something like the Air Force, you might, maybe as an example, delegating some of your identification authority to an artificial intelligence system. How crowded is the airspace? Are there a lot of to an artificial intelligence system? How crowded is the airspace? Are there a lot of
This one first.
airspace? Are there a lot of civilians operating in this airspace? That could absolutely be a consideration. Something absolutely be a consideration. Something that ties into ROEs as well. Consideration. Something that ties into consideration. That ties into ROEs. Consideration. That ties into ROEs as well. How tightly are you controlling the employment of weapons? Is this a very tightly controlled theater versus maybe in major maybe in major combat operations, those ROEs are a little bit less restrictive. And then capabilities and tactics of an adversary, I'd say, is absolutely another factor. Activities and tactics of an adversary, I'd say, is absolutely an adversary. I'd say abilities and tactics of an adversary is absolutely another. And tactics of an adversary says absolutely. Tactics of an adversary says absolutely another factor. And tactics of an adversary is absolutely another factor. Capabilities and tactics of an adversary is absolutely another factor. Is your and tactics of an adversary is absolutely another factor. Is your adversary expected to test the limits of human decision-making bandwidth? Decision-making bandwidth in a sort of traditional air war, where your adversary is generating manned fighter sorties out of a few different bases, and that sort of falls within the bandwidth, if you will, of a traditional air operations center. Maybe you don't need if you will, of a traditional air operations center. Maybe you don't need to utilize AI in your operational decision making. Now, on the other hand, if you have an adversary that is very adept at, using high mass, or like leveraging mass and putting a lot of different potentially unmanned vehicles into the air at the same time to really stretch the limits of your decision making. You might absolutely need to lean more heavily on AI decision making at the operational level. And then there are some decision making at the operational level. There are some at the operational level. There are some. It's intertwined too with at the operational level. It's intertwined too with other parts of doctrine, with specific parts of doctrine, with specifically mission command or agile combat employment. You know, how centralized is your decision making? And that goes into your question about and that goes into your question about and that goes into your question about
Get rid of that heart.
and that goes into your question about delegating teaming modes to the weapon system operators. You know, to an extent, if maybe as an example, if I'm an airborne ISR platform and I have a little box that can just do my mission but do it better with a little bit of AI, you know, that's something that can happen better with a little bit of AI. That's something that can happen at the tactical level. But if I'm maybe in performing agile combat employment and I maybe don't have 100%, don't have 100%, have 100% uptime, don't have 100% uptime communication back to my back to the communication back to communication back to the operational commander. Communication back to the operational commander. The operational commander. That could definitely be a case where the Joint Forces commander could delegate some of that decision-making authority to maybe a forward operating station, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that understanding the risk posed by AI, that's what a lot of that's what a lot of people are concerned about when we talk about how are we going to employ it. How are we going to employ it? How is it going to be used? How much authority do you want to give to an artificial intelligence system? Do we understand it? Do we understand it? That's something that do we understand it? That's something that I think a lot of people are concerned about. And so again, back to what Tech Sergeant Calhoun was saying, it behooves us. I think a lot of people are concerned about, and so again, back to what Tech Sergeant. Again, back to what. Again, back to what Tech Sergeant Calhoun was saying, it behooves us to understand the system and understand how it works. Tech Sergeant Calhoun, you approach some and how it works. TechStarter Calhoun, you approach some of this in your paper as well. Your paper addresses some challenges to the Air Force presented by the use of AI, and a couple that you highlighted were an artificial intelligence possibly like using artificial intelligence to identify targets in a combat situation.
Okay, buddy.
And so potentially the AI misidentifies a target due to outgroup homogeneity bias or excluding a target from being identified due to confirmation bias. And can you briefly explain these examples and help us understand how operators of AI systems can identify and overcome those challenges that the AI is going to present?
And
AI is going to present.
And so outgroup homogeneity bias essentially refers to the idea that our group is diverse, but that other group, their group members are mostly the same. And this can manifest itself in different ways. So for instance, I'm going to use our two main political parties. Our two main political parties. A group of Republicans may convene from time to time. Maybe they get together in their community, for community camaraderie or whatever else. And over time, they notice And over time, they notice the variety of their ideas and thought processes that they collectively have, and they might just have and how diverse they all really are, even though they all identify as Republicans. However, this same group, if they're thinking about the Democrats, well, they might, more than likely, they're going to see the Democrats as kind of being all the same or mostly the same, or they think the same way, or they believe the same things, when in reality, the Democrats have just as many they have just a greater variety of ideas, when in reality the Democrats have just as many they have just a greater variety of ideas. The Democrats have just as many, just a greater variety of ideas. The Democrats have just as many, just a, the Democrats have just as many, just a great. Democrats have just a greater variety of ideas and thought processes that the Republicans do.